Hi, my name is Paige Phillips, and today we're going to talk about assessments and evaluations. Some of the key concepts that are going to be covered today are what is assessment, what is evaluation, the similarities and differences. We're also going to talk about culturally relevant assessments, students' well-being, and school leadership. So to start, we're going to talk about what is assessment. Assessments can be defined as a way to identify individual students' strengths and weaknesses so that teachers can provide specialized educational support. These assessments are geared towards giving students a measure of their progress. There are two major functions of assessments: to see if learning is successful or not, and to clarify expectations. The four basic components include measuring improvement over time, motivating students to study, evaluating the teaching methods, and ranking the students' capabilities. Some important things about assessments are that they encourage students to pass their tests, which in turn drives student learning. These type of assessments, educators can choose and can influence the type of learning produced. So this can be superficial learning to just recalling information, or critical thinking and creative problem solving. Educators are also able to set the standards. So they're able to see what is demonstrating understanding, what demonstrates knowledge, and what demonstrates mastery. There are a couple different types of assessments. These include formative, summative, informal, formal, continuous, and final, process and product, and divergent and convergent. One important thing about assessments is that they support critical reflective teaching. So not only is it beneficial to the students, but it also encourages the teachers to look back at their teaching methods and see what is working for students and what may not be working. Some different types of assessments that we're going to talk about are, first one is formative versus summative. So formative assessments provide feedback, they identify strengths and weaknesses, they improve further performance, and they're used in the learning process. Summative assessments, they are made on grading decisions and progression readiness. They're more of a judgment overall for performance at the end. So formative really looks at what they're doing in the moment and seeing how they're working through that, while summative is kind of an end result. The next one we're going to talk about is informal and formal. Informal provides formative feedback, and it's done while completing other tasks. Formal, you're aware of the task for assessment purposes, and its formal is similar to summative, and there's a higher standard. So informal, you're done while completing other tasks, so it's in the middle of learning something, while formal is at the end to see an overall grade or an overall assessment of how your learning has gone. The next thing that we're going to talk about is what is evaluation. Evaluation is to judge the value and quality of something by comparing it to a standard or other. What evaluation focuses on are the grades and testing the knowledge of students. So it more so comes at the end of the learning process. The five basic components include articulating the purpose of the educational system, identifying and collecting relevant information, having ideas that are valuable and useful to learners in their lives and professions, analyzing and interpreting information for learners, and classroom management or classroom decision making. Some functions of evaluation is that it's to gather data, it's to analyze it, and to use it to see how effective your teaching practices or program are. So these evaluations can come through internal evaluations, which are ongoing and applied by teachers, and all participants are involved. So these are things like when your principal comes into your classroom and evaluates the teaching practices that you are using and how students are doing in your classroom as well. So they are used by teachers and administrators just to kind of see how you're doing. External evaluations come from someone higher up in the educational system and are used for accreditation and funding, or it can be used to evaluate the programs that are being taught in your school. Some of the similarities and differences are what we're going to cover next. And these are some things like assessment is ongoing, it's positive, individualized, it's valuable, and it provides feedback. While evaluation provides closure, it's judgmental, and is applied against standards, and it shows shortfalls. But both of these require criteria, they use measures, and they're both evidence driven. And then this image on the right is just another assessment versus evaluation graph, so you can see how those two measure up to each other. Some key differences between assessments and evaluations. Assessments are all about collecting data for improvement. They provide feedback, they're formative, and the criteria is set by the teachers and students. While evaluation is judging on meeting certain criteria, it assesses the standards if they're met, it's summative, and the criteria is set by an evaluator. Some critical thinking. Now these are some things that can be done in both assessments and evaluation. It's important that teachers' assessments and evaluations promote critical thinking so that students are able to articulate what they know and apply their knowledge in real life, rather than just having a teach-to-test mentality. Paul Richard describes critical thinking as analyzing and assessing reason, identifying strengths and weaknesses in thinking, identifying obstacles to rational thought, dealing with egocentrism and sociocentrism, understanding the foundations of ethical reasoning, detecting bias and propaganda in the national and international news, conceptualizing the human mind as an instrument for intellectual work, developing strategies that enable one to apply critical thinking to everyday life, understanding the stages of one's development as a thinker, active and cooperative learning, the art of asking essential questions, scientific thinking, close reading and substantive writing, and grasping the logic of discipline. Critical thinking skills are essential for students so that they are able to apply their knowledge in real life situations, which they can do in both assessments and evaluations. The next thing we're going to cover is culturally relevant assessments. Culturally relevant assessments are assessments that take into consideration of the diverse student populations. So they're assessments that try to incorporate aspects of the student's culture to make sure that course material and assessments are relevant to them. So culturally relevant means to allow students to make connections between their daily experiences and their learning. And while they're doing that, they're also using those experiences to benefit their classroom experience. So the importance of culturally relevant assessments is that it's putting relationships at the forefront to enable students to share their stories. It's also using these personal experiences to drive community and civic engagement. The next thing we're going to talk about is student well-being. Student well-being can be defined as a mental, psychological, and socio-emotional health and wellness. So in schools, students acquire skills of how to face adversity and feel more connected to the people around them, and in turn aim higher in their future goals and endeavors. To promote social well-being in schools, we need to create positive relationships, create belonging and behavioral management, create positive perceptions of tests, create an atmosphere that promotes parental involvement and life satisfaction, create a partnership between schools and parents, keep data on bullying, and involve the entire school community. If we do these things, then we can promote social well-being in our schools, and it will in turn help our schools overall with academics and with the well-being of our students. And the last thing we're going to talk about is school leadership. The importance of school leadership is that it can influence the school's outcomes, the motivations of teachers, and the school environment and climate. School leadership doesn't just come from administrators or principals. It can also come from students as well. And when they're given the ability to make important decisions, there's a difference in school and student performance because they feel that they have a say in their learning and the things that are taking place in their school. This is also a form of distributing school leadership, which involves everyone and evenly distributes responsibility and accountability. This can go from principals to teachers to students. And then there is also a need for leadership development. So we have to be able to work through and help people learn how to become good leaders, so that we can share that responsibility and accountability. The effects that school leadership has on student learning is that it improves leadership. It in turn enhances students' learning. Leadership can help improve troubled schools and large school reforms. And some of the basics are for school leadership is that there has to be directions that are set. So giving people goals helps motivate them. Another basic is to develop people. So you want to focus not on just what you're doing, but also the experiences and the relationships that you're building with people. And then redesigning the organization. This is a focus on strengthening or improving your school district or your school. And all of these things in turn can help student learning. And the next is my references slides.